In this video, you're going to learn 5 tips for leading kids, in worship. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com, your daily dose of practical worship leading tips. If you want to find those tips, head over to Instagram or Facebook at Leading Worship Well, where I'm posting new worship leading tips every single day. But you're here on YouTube, so go ahead, hit subscribe down below, and let's get into it, because today we're talking about how to lead kids in worship. And this is something that I see a lot of interest in. I see a lot of people asking the question, and there's not a ton of information on it, so I thought I'd share my thoughts with you. A little background about me. I haven't led kids in worship a ton, but when I have, I feel like I've done a few things that have worked well, which I'm going to share with you today. And really, I think about this. I used to lead worship at a Christian school for their chapel time, and that was 6th, sometimes 5th, 6th through 12th grade. So there's the youth side of things. I think what I'm going to share today bleeds into that a little bit, but I'm going to focus more on probably kindergarten to 5th grade. So I think it'll be tangible and practical for whatever age you're leading, but I just want you to keep that in mind. Before we get into the tips though, I want to hear from you. If you are one of those people who have been leading kids in worship, I want to hear what works. Let us know in the comments below, what is your best tip for leading children in worship? I'll talk to you in a second. Thanks so much for leaving your answer in the comments below. I can't wait to read them, because I'm sure there's a lot of good stuff down there. So let's get into these 5 tips for leading children in worship. The first thing you need to do whenever you're leading children in worship is actually the same thing that you should do whenever you lead adults in worship. But the first thing you need to do is explain, explain, explain. Listen, these kids are learning how to worship. So they don't come in to your gatherings, whatever that is for where you're leading worship for children. They don't come into that with these preconceived notions about what worship is or how to do it. You know, whenever you lead adults in worship, you start your service and you probably ask them to stand, but they don't. You don't need to tell them to stand. They would probably figure that out on their own. And kids, they don't come in with that knowledge of what to do in worship, the practical side of things, let alone the spiritual side of things. So this is an opportunity to teach kids how to worship. So make it fun. Don't talk to them for 15 minutes about some deep theological thing about worship, but explain, tell them why you're doing what you're doing. I think if you just get up there and you play songs and you don't explain what you do, then kids usually relate that to other areas where they see music in their life. So they might think of a concert that they went to and they just think, oh, here's music, and so I'm just at a concert, so I'm here to listen, or I'm here to enjoy it. But no, that's not what we're doing whenever we're in the church. We are there to worship God. So make sure that you tell them that. Explain why you're doing what you're doing. And you know that kids are curious. They love to ask questions. So if they have a question, don't be like, shut up, little Johnny, I'm trying to lead worship here. Take the time to address it. I hope you wouldn't say shut up to the kids that you're leading, but you know what I mean. Just answer their questions. They are curious. So think, what questions is a little kid going to ask? Or have a conversation with them. I talk about building relationships all the time with people that you're leading in worship. You can do the same thing with kids. If you are leading worship for children, it's probably at a kids ministry, youth group, whatever. There's more opportunity to build relationships at those things than just on a Sunday morning with the people in your church. So focus on that. Build relationships with them. Start conversations about worship and see what they're not sure about, and then use that market research, I will call it, to inform what you need to teach the kids that you're leading in worship about. So number 1, explain why you're doing what you're doing. Number 2, and this is more for little children. I don't think that this really works 6th grade and up, but kindergarten through 5th grade, this is so important, and it is one word: dance. Just dance. I've helped at VBS a lot during my life, And nothing keeps kids more engaged than whenever they get the opportunity to move around. Adults, we can sit here and we can stare at words on a screen and think about the meaning and just sit there and stare and sing, and that's fine. That's perfectly acceptable. That's the normal way of worshiping, although some people dance too in church as adults. Whatever you do, that's fine. But kids love to be active. They love to run around, all of this different stuff. So put some dance moves to these songs. There's nothing that gets kids more engaged than dancing in worship. That's what I've noticed. So if you can teach kids to dance, then they like legitimately remember the dance moves, number one, but even deeper than that, they remember the lyrics that go along with the dance moves. I'm amazed whenever I help at like a vacation Bible school. By the end of the week, these kids know these songs and they like own these songs and they're screaming out these songs and they know every lyric to them. What if we could get our churches to do that, like the adults on Sunday morning? That would be pretty crazy, right? But I think one of the keys to that is this dance piece. Like they are not just thinking about the lyrics, they aren't just reading them on a screen, but their whole body is involved and they're getting their energy out. So number 2, put some dance moves to these worship songs. Let's move on to number 3. Number 3, and while I just said to dance, and that seems a little childish sometimes, and maybe you're thinking of songs that you'd put dance moves to, and you're thinking of like This Little Light of Mine and Jesus Loves the Little Children. There's nothing wrong with those songs. But tip number 3 is don't dumb the worship experience down just because these are kids. Sure, you might have to explain things in a more simplified manner, but kids aren't stupid. Like, a lot of kids are really smart and they can handle way more than you think that they can handle. Number 1, in your instruction and your explanation of worship, if you explain it well, which takes a lot more time of preparation on your part, but also like songs. The songs that you pick, you don't have to pick these like little kitty, super candy sweet worship songs. I don't know what that means, but that's just the phrase that comes to my head, like the kind of music that gives you cavities. Like, we don't need to pick that for kids. Sometimes that works and it's okay. But I believe that kids, they want to sing the songs that adults are singing. Like, they're there on Sunday mornings and they're sitting in service and they see these adults singing these songs, and whenever you were a little kid, what did you want to do? You wanted to be an adult, right? You wanted to grow up. And I think that's what kids want. So one of the ways you can give that to them is to lead the songs that you're leading on a Sunday morning for your kids. And maybe you do them in a different context, because context is everything. So maybe they end up a little bit more kiddie or whatever, but you can sing the same songs. And not only that, but that reinforces this idea of intergenerational worship, which is something that we don't think about a lot. We just kind of pick the songs that we think work for the majority of our church. But I think most songs work for the majority of our church if we just include our kids in the process. Like, there's kids, there's adults, teenagers in there too, kind of, and then like, the older people, the seniors, whatever you want to call them. I don't know what you call them at your church, so people aren't offended. But older people, right? Like, we should all be worshiping together. We don't have to have these different styles. I know people like traditional and contemporary, all of that stuff, but we can worship together, and you can include kids in that process by singing the songs that you would sing on a Sunday morning at your kids' ministry. So don't dumb it down. Don't dumb down the worship experience. The children can handle it as long as you explain things well. Number 4, super important, get buy-in from the leaders. Talk to the other kids' ministry leaders, all right? Because here's what's going to be true. The kids in your children's ministry are going to look at the adult leaders who are leading, or the teenagers who help out or whatever, and they're going to imitate what they do. So if your adult leader is sitting over there during the worship time and they're on their phone and they're not interested, or they're just kind of standing there like this, like, the kids are going to see that and they're going to think, well, worship must not be very important because Henry over there isn't paying attention, so I don't need to pay attention either, right? Like, kids see examples and they follow them. So on the other end of the spectrum, if you want kids to participate in worship, then get these adults, get your student your kids ministry leaders to participate fully in worship, and probably even more participation than they would on a Sunday morning, right? Like maybe they feel a little stupid like dancing around, but that's what you need in the kids ministry. So encourage not just the kids to worship, but outside of the actual worship time, talk to your leaders and tell them, like, we are setting the example for our kids in worship and we want them to worship, so we need to lead by example. We need to show them what worship looks like, because you can explain it to them all you want and you can say it in the perfect way that makes sense to an 8-year-old kid, but until they actually see it, they aren't going to know what it looks like. So make sure that your leaders are buying into the vision of teaching your kids to worship and they are actually worshiping themselves. Tip number 5, let kids lead kids. All right, kids, they can follow adults and you can be an authority figure, but there's something about letting somebody younger lead worship in a kid's setting. So maybe it's time for you to step back a little bit from the worship leading responsibilities in your kids' ministry. And what could you do? Well, number 1, you could just include some kids on the worship team, and it doesn't have to be anything super structured. You can just once in a while, like if you've identified a few kids who are like really into worship and they get it, then invite them up on stage and just have them stand up there and sing with you or like lead the dance moves or whatever. So that's one way you can do it. You can invite kids from the actual kids ministry. The other thing you can do is you can have teenagers lead with you, or like your youth at your church, because that shrinks the age gap a little bit. Let me say this, there's a difference between like a 60-year-old leading a group of 8-year-olds and a 13-year-old leading a group of 8-year-olds. You know, there's an age difference there. And so the 13-year-old is going to be able to relate to the younger kids in a different way. And it's not a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just pointing that out. So let kids lead kids, or at least let students lead kids in your kids ministry, and that'll help them with their understanding of what worship is. They'll be able to connect on a deeper level. So leading kids in worship, it's a noble task. If you do that, thank you for what you do. I know that it's difficult. There's not a ton of resources out there, so thank you for what you do. Once again, if you've been doing this for a while, I'd love to hear from you. We would love to hear from you. You know, this isn't just me teaching what I know about worship. Like, we are in this together. We are a community of worship leaders, so make sure to leave your advice down in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Before you go, I've got a free training for you. It's called 5 Tips to Instantly Improve Your Worship Leading, and there's a link to it down in the description below. But in this free training that I want to give you, it talks all about 5 things that you can do that if you're just aware of them, they aren't difficult to do. If you're just aware of them, then they will instantly improve your worship leading. So if you're interested in that, you want to level up your worship leading, check it out in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me today. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.